The CEO of a successful restaurant chain had always been a hands-on leader. However, after years of being caught up in board meetings and managing corporate strategies, he realized he was losing touch with the everyday workings of his restaurants, the energy and struggles of his employees, the challenges they faced on the floor, were things he no longer understood deeply. His job had become more about numbers and reports, not the heart of the business, the people. One evening, after a particularly long day in the office, he decided he needed to make a change. The idea came to him unexpectedly. He would go undercover. He would visit one of his restaurants as a regular customer, blending in with the crowd. The goal was to observe the staff, the atmosphere, and the way things ran without anyone knowing who he truly was. This way he could get honest, unfiltered feedback. No one would be on their best behavior because they knew the boss was watching. He carefully planned out his visit. He set a date for the following week, picked a location that was far from his usual spots, and made sure to disguise himself. The CEO, who was used to wearing expensive suits, chose simple clothes, jeans, a jacket, and a baseball cap to make sure no one recognized him. His heart beat faster as he thought about the possibility of his plan failing. He didn't want anyone to know. He didn't want to disrupt the flow of the evening, but he needed the truth. He needed to see what the day-to-day life was like for his employees. On the night of his undercover visit, the restaurant was as busy as ever. The hum of conversation, the clinking of silverware, and the sizzling sound from the kitchen filled the air. The restaurant's signature smells wafted through the space, teasing everyone who entered. The CEO stepped inside, scanning the room carefully. He saw the familiar decor, the layout he had spent years perfecting, but the faces were all new to him. The people working here were strangers. In this moment, he was just another face in the crowd. He was quickly seated by a cheerful hostess who greeted him with a smile and led him to his table. As he took his seat, he noticed the staff moving with purpose, hustling between tables, carrying trays full of food and drinks. The CEO watched closely, taking in every detail. He watched how the servers interacted with customers, how they juggled their duties, and how the chefs worked diligently behind the scenes to prepare orders. He could tell they were all doing their best to keep the restaurant running smoothly. A young waitress, probably in her mid-20s, came over to greet him. She had a warm smile, but there was a hint of exhaustion in her eyes. Her uniform was neat, but the slight bags under her eyes made it clear that she had been working for hours. As she took his drink order, she seemed to move in a robotic rhythm, her steps quick and measured, her voice polite but lacking any real enthusiasm. The CEO could sense that she was doing what she had to do, but not with the passion he remembered from his younger days in the industry. She seemed weary, like someone who had been working long hours without much rest. He ordered his meal and continued to observe. The restaurant was busy, but it wasn't chaotic. It was organized chaos, if there was such a thing. Everyone seemed to know what they were doing, but it was clear that there was a lot of pressure on the staff to keep things moving smoothly. The CEO wondered how often they got breaks, how many of them had to work overtime, and if they were paid fairly for all the stress and long hours they put in. As the evening wore on, he couldn't help but notice how much the employees were carrying on their shoulders. Some seemed to be managing just fine, but others, like his waitress, looked like they were barely hanging on. The CEO couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something. Something wasn't quite right. There was a disconnect between the business he had built and the people who were working in it. He had always been a big believer in providing excellent service, but what good was great service if the people providing it were overworked and underappreciated? The waitress returned with his food. She placed the plate in front of him and smiled, though it was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The CEO thanked her and she walked away without saying much more. He tried his best to enjoy his meal, but his mind kept drifting back to her. Something about her bothered him. It wasn't just her tired eyes or the way she moved. It was the way she had spoken when she introduced herself. There was a hint of frustration in her voice. The kind of frustration that comes from feeling like no one really sees you, no one really cares about what you're going through. As he chewed his food, the CEO found himself becoming more and more restless. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was witnessing something important. The staff, the customers, the energy in the restaurant, it all felt familiar yet somehow distant. It was like watching a movie where the plot seemed to be missing a key scene. He needed to know more. He needed to understand why this particular waitress seemed so off. He continued to watch her as she moved between tables, taking orders, clearing plates, and doing everything in her power to keep customers happy. But there was something in her body language that was hard to ignore. She was tense, stiff. She was working hard, but it didn't feel like she was enjoying it. She was just going through the motions, doing her job because she had to, not because she wanted to. By the time the CEO finished his meal, he had made up his mind. He couldn't just sit back and let this continue. He needed to understand what was really going on behind the scenes. So he decided to stay for a little longer, to see if there was more to the story. He watched as the waitress disappeared into the kitchen, and then, almost instinctively, he stood up and followed her. He didn't know what he expected to find, but as he made his way toward the kitchen, his heart began to race. This was his chance to truly understand what his employees were experiencing. He wasn't just a customer now. He was someone who wanted to help. He wasn't sure how or why, but something inside him told him he needed to get to the truth. He needed to know if his business was truly supporting its staff, or if there was something more he could be doing to make their lives better. As he reached the door to the kitchen, he paused for a moment, listening. Through the noise of the kitchen, the chatter, and the sounds of cooking, he heard something unexpected. It was faint at first, but then it became clear. The sound of someone crying. His heart sank. It was coming from the back of the kitchen. He couldn't tell who it was, but the sound was unmistakable. Someone was in pain, and then, without thinking, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The kitchen was a world of its own. The noise was overwhelming. The clanging of pots and pans, the sizzling of food, the fast-paced chatter of the kitchen staff. But despite all the activity, there was something else in the air. A quiet tension that the CEO immediately noticed as soon as he stepped inside. The heat from the stoves, the frantic movement of the chefs, and the rhythmic chopping of knives all seemed to blend into a single overwhelming sound. But underneath it, something was off. He stood just inside the kitchen for a moment, unsure of where to go. The crying had stopped, but the atmosphere still felt heavy. He wasn't sure who was upset or why they were crying, but it was clear that the stress in the kitchen wasn't just about the rush of orders. It was something more personal, something deeper, and it was enough to stop him in his tracks. The staff continued to work, their focus on their tasks, unaware of his presence. He could feel the heat of the kitchen on his skin, the air thick with the smell of grilled food and spices. He stepped forward quietly, not wanting to make a scene or draw attention. His eyes scanned the room, looking for the source of the distress. Near the back of the kitchen, behind a stack of crates, he spotted her, the waitress he had noticed earlier. She was sitting on the floor, her knees pulled up to her chest, her head down. She was trying to hide her tears, but it was clear that she was struggling. Her shoulders shook slightly and her hands were pressed tightly against her face. She hadn't noticed him yet, and he wasn't sure how to approach the situation. He could see she was trying to keep it together, but it was obvious that something had broken her. For a moment, the CEO debated whether or not to intervene. He didn't want to intrude on her personal space, but at the same time, he couldn't stand by and do nothing. The moment felt important. This wasn't just a minor issue, it was something much bigger. The waitress wasn't just crying because of a bad day at work. There was more to it. He could sense it, and that sense of urgency pushed him to take action. He cleared his throat gently, but it was loud enough to get her attention. She looked up quickly, startled as if she hadn't expected anyone to be there. Her eyes widened in surprise as she saw him standing there, his face unfamiliar. She quickly wiped her eyes, trying to hide the evidence of her distress, but the CEO could tell she was embarrassed. She stood up slowly, her face flushed with shame, and forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Are you okay?" the CEO asked softly, his voice calm and understanding. She hesitated for a moment, clearly caught off guard by the question. The CEO wasn't sure what he expected, but he didn't expect her to break down even more. But that's exactly what happened. Her lip trembled, and she shook her head slightly as if trying to hold herself together but unable to. The tears began to flow again, and she quickly turned her face away, ashamed of her emotions. "I'm fine," she muttered, though it was clear she wasn't. The CEO took a step closer, careful not to invade her space too much. He could see the strain on her face, the exhaustion in her eyes. It was more than just a bad day. It was like a weight had been placed on her shoulders, a weight that she was struggling to carry. "It's okay," he said gently. "You don't have to pretend. You don't have to be fine if you're not." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for sincerity. She must have seen something in his expression because she finally let go, her shoulders sagging as she sat back down on the floor. The CEO remained standing, not wanting to crowd her, but wanting to make sure she knew she wasn't alone. "I don't know how to fix it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything's just too much." The CEO's heart went out to her. He could hear the weight of her words. It wasn't just a bad day or a bad shift. This was the culmination of something much deeper. He could tell that this was a problem she had been carrying for a long time, and it was finally coming to a head. "Can you tell me what's going on?" he asked, his voice steady but kind. For a long moment, the waitress didn't answer. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her uniform, still reluctant to speak. The kitchen continued to hum with activity around them, but it felt as if time had slowed down. It was just the two of them in that small space, with the noise from the rest of the restaurant barely registering. I'm trying my best," she finally said, her voice cracking. "But it's never enough. I'm working double shifts, I'm barely seeing my family, and every day is the same. I can't keep up." The CEO's heart ached as she spoke. He could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the frustration, the feeling of being trapped in a never-ending cycle. It was the kind of exhaustion that seeped into your bones, the kind that made it hard to see a way out. He could tell that she was running on empty, doing her best to keep things together but barely holding it all together. "I don't know what else to do," she continued, her voice trembling. "I need this job, but it's killing me. I'm not even sure why I'm still doing it. I just need a break, but I can't take one." The CEO listened carefully, his mind working quickly. He had worked in restaurants long enough to know the toll the job could take on people. He had seen it before, the burnout, the exhaustion, the feelings of being unappreciated. It was one thing to be aware of these issues, but hearing it from one of his own employees was another. It hit him harder than he expected. "I hear you," he said, his voice full of empathy. "I understand more than you think." She looked up at him, surprised by his words. He knew she was probably used to hearing dismissive comments, the usual tough-it-out advice that was common in the industry. But he wasn't going to offer that kind of advice. He wasn't going to brush her concerns aside. He could see she was genuinely struggling and he needed to help. "I want to make sure you're taken care of," he said, his tone firm but kind. "You don't have to keep pushing yourself like this. It's not healthy for you, and it's not healthy for the people around you." She looked at him, her eyes wide. She seemed to be processing his words, trying to figure out if he meant them. "Do you think you could take some time off?" he asked. "A break to recharge? Your job will be here when you're ready to come back." The waitress was quiet for a long time, and the CEO wasn't sure if she would accept his offer. But after a moment she nodded slowly. I think I need that," she said softly. The CEO smiled, relieved that she had agreed. "Take care of yourself. That's the most important thing right now." As he turned to leave the kitchen, he felt a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in a long time. He wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was someone who could make a real difference in people's lives. And that was exactly what he intended to do. The CEO returned to his table, feeling a mix of relief and a deep sense of responsibility. He had done something small, but it felt significant. The waitress had agreed to take some time off, but the CEO knew that wasn't enough. He had seen the cracks in the system. It wasn't just about one person, one waitress, it was a bigger issue. The pressure on the staff, the long hours, the emotional toll that came with working in the restaurant industry. It wasn't just this restaurant either. He realized it was likely happening across all his locations. The weight of this realization sat heavily on him, but it also sparked something inside him. He couldn't just walk away from this. He had to make real changes, not just for one employee, but for all of them. As the evening continued, he stayed at his table, watching the rest of the staff. He observed the other wait staff, the kitchen crew, and even the managers running around, making sure everything ran smoothly. The restaurant was still busy and the team was working at full speed. It was a well-oiled machine, but the CEO noticed how the gears were starting to grind. People were getting tired, their movements more mechanical, less spirited. There were no smiles, no laughter, just the hum of work. He finished his meal, but the thoughts swirling in his head made it hard to enjoy it. He hadn't expected this. He had thought he was going to get some casual insights into the operations of his restaurant, but instead, he had uncovered something much deeper. The disconnect between management and staff, the overwhelming pressure on his workers, and the exhaustion that went unnoticed for so long. It all made him question the culture he had built. The CEO left his table, paid for his meal, and walked toward the front of the restaurant. But before he could exit, he was stopped by the manager, who greeted him with a smile. "Thank you for coming in tonight," the manager said, his tone polite but professional. "I hope you had a good experience." "I did, thank you," the CEO replied, trying to mask his thoughts. He wasn't sure how much he wanted to reveal about his observations. "But I couldn't help but notice a few things. I've been watching the staff, working hard, running around, trying to keep things in order." The manager nodded, not catching the CEO's tone. "It's always like this, especially on weekends," the manager said. "The pace is fast, the pressure is high, but we get it done. The team's used to it." The CEO studied him for a moment. There was something in his words that didn't sit right with him. "Are they really used to it?" he asked. "Or are they just pushing through because they have no choice?" The manager hesitated. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was just that the reality of the situation had become so normalized that he didn't question it anymore. But the CEO could see it in his eyes. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that something needed to change. "I think they do the best they can," the manager said, almost defensively. "It's a tough job, but everyone gets by." The CEO nodded thoughtfully. He didn't want to blame anyone. The pressure on the team was clear, and it was likely coming from the top down. But now, seeing it firsthand, he couldn't ignore it. "I'll be back soon," the CEO said, walking toward the door. "Thanks for everything tonight." As he stepped outside into the cool night air, the weight of the evening's discoveries pressed down on him even more. He had started this evening with the intention of learning about his business, but what he had uncovered was a human issue, one that affected his employees' well-being and, in turn, the quality of the restaurant's atmosphere. The staff were working tirelessly, but it wasn't sustainable. He knew that if something didn't change, the quality of service would eventually suffer, and it would only be a matter of time before burnout took its toll. The CEO returned to his office the next morning, his mind buzzing with ideas. He couldn't shake the image of the waitress sitting on the kitchen floor, her eyes red from crying. She wasn't the only one. He had seen it in the eyes of others too. The exhaustion, the frustration, the feeling of being trapped in an endless cycle. It wasn't just a problem at this restaurant. It was something he needed to address across all his locations. He called for a meeting with his senior leadership team. They gathered in the conference room, and the CEO wasted no time getting to the point. "We have a problem," he began, his voice calm but firm, "and it's a problem that's been brewing for a long time." The team looked at each other, unsure of where this was going. "I visited one of our restaurants last night, Undercover. I wanted to see firsthand what our staff goes through, to understand the challenges they face." A murmur ran through the room. The CEO continued, unflinching. "I saw something that I wasn't expecting. Our staff is under an immense amount of pressure. They're working long hours, often with little support. It's taking a toll on them, and it's affecting their well-being, their morale, and ultimately, the quality of the service we provide." There was silence. The senior leadership team exchanged uncomfortable glances. They had heard the complaints, of course. They had seen the turnover rates and the occasional burnout, but hearing it directly from the CEO hit differently. "I spoke to one of our waitresses last night," the CEO continued. "She was crying in the kitchen. She's working double shifts, barely seeing her family, and she's at her breaking point. I know this isn't an isolated case. It's happening at other locations too." The room was still quiet, and the CEO could see the gears turning in everyone's minds. "We need to do better," the CEO said. "We can't just throw money at the problem. We can't just hire more people to cover the shifts. We need to change the way we operate. We need to create a healthier, more supportive work environment for our staff." The senior leadership team nodded, each person processing the gravity of the situation in their own way. The CEO had made it clear. This wasn't about the bottom line. This was about the people who worked for him, the ones who made his restaurant chain what it was. And they were suffering. "From now on, we're going to put our employees' well-being first," the CEO said. "We'll evaluate work hours, ensure fair breaks, and provide mental health support. But we also need to foster a culture where it's okay to ask for help. No one should feel like they have to hide their struggles." One of the senior leaders, the HR manager, spoke up. "We've been aware of the burnout issue, but we've focused too much on performance metrics and customer feedback. We need to prioritize employee satisfaction and mental health just as much as we do customer service. The CEO nodded, his eyes focused. Exactly. We need to create a space where people feel valued, where they don't feel like they're just numbers in a system. We owe it to them. As the meeting continued, the CEO outlined plans for improving the workplace environment. They would begin implementing policies that prioritized employee mental health, offered flexible schedules, and ensured everyone had the opportunity to take breaks when needed. They also discussed offering counseling services and creating a more transparent feedback loop for employees to voice their concerns. It was clear that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Changing the culture of a business, especially one as large as his, was going to take time. But the CEO knew this was the right move. He had seen the reality of what his employees were going through, and he wasn't going to stand by and let it continue. The first step was recognizing the problem. The next step was making a commitment to fix it, and he was ready to take that step. The days following the meeting with his leadership team were full of action. The CEO knew that words were important, but actions would speak louder. He couldn't afford to let this be another corporate promise that faded over time. This was about real change, and he was determined to make it happen. He spent hours drafting a plan, putting together initiatives to improve the work environment for the restaurant staff, and figuring out how to implement them quickly without disrupting operations. The first thing he did was start with the basics: work hours and breaks. He had seen firsthand how long shifts combined with back-to-back hours without enough rest wore his employees down. In the restaurant business, the pressure to keep up with demand was relentless, and it often came at the cost of personal time. Employees were expected to juggle multiple tables, manage high-stress situations, and keep customers happy without any time to recharge. The CEO realized this was unsustainable. He called in the HR team and the managers from various locations. They needed to come up with a more balanced schedule that would reduce burnout and give employees time to rest. The CEO made it clear that no one should feel like they had to push through exhaustion just to meet the demands of the job. "We're going to start offering more flexible shifts," he said. "Employees should be able to take breaks when they need them. We'll rotate shifts to ensure no one is working the same long hours every week. And we'll make sure that everyone gets at least one full day off every week, no exceptions." The HR team was on board. They knew that these changes would take time to implement, but they also knew that the current system was broken. Employees had been pushing themselves too hard for too long, and it was showing. The team began to work on a new scheduling system that would better meet the needs of the employees, while ensuring that the restaurant could still run efficiently. While the scheduling changes were a step in the right direction, the CEO knew that there was more to be done. Mental health support was another key area that needed attention. He understood that working in a restaurant was physically and emotionally demanding. Employees were constantly on their feet, dealing with stressful situations and often receiving little appreciation from customers or management. All of this could take a toll on one's mental well-being. The CEO arranged for a series of workshops and seminars for employees, focusing on stress management, coping techniques, and emotional well-being. He wanted to make sure that every employee knew it was okay to ask for help and that they didn't have to carry their struggles alone. Additionally, he set up an anonymous helpline for those who needed someone to talk to, but didn't feel comfortable addressing their issues directly. "We're not just here to support you physically, but mentally as well," the CEO explained in a meeting with the restaurant staff. "If you're feeling overwhelmed, don't hesitate to reach out. We want to make sure you're okay, not just as employees, but as people." The staff listened intently, some of them nodding while others exchanged quiet glances. For many, this was the first time they had ever heard a company acknowledge the mental toll that the job took on them. It was a small gesture, but it made a big difference. They began to see that their well-being mattered to the CEO, that they weren't just replaceable parts in a larger machine. As the changes began to take shape, the CEO also realized that he needed to address the culture of the restaurant. For too long, the focus had been on efficiency, customer satisfaction, and profit margins. But he had learned that a business could only thrive if it supported its employees, if the staff felt valued, respected, and taken care of. Without that, everything else would fall apart. He called another meeting, this time with all the restaurant managers. He wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page and fully committed to the changes. "We've been pushing our employees hard for too long," he said, looking around the room. "We need to shift the culture. We need to create a place where people feel supported, where they know their hard work is appreciated. One of the managers spoke up. But won't that slow us down? Won't it affect the service we provide? The CEO smiled. No, taking care of our employees is the fastest way to improve service. When people are well rested, well supported, and not running on empty, they can give their best to the customers. They'll be happier, more engaged, and that will show in their work. Another manager nodded in agreement. That makes sense. We've always focused on making the customer experience great, but we've never really thought about the experience of the people making that happen. Exactly. That was the key realization. The CEO wanted to create a culture where employees didn't feel like they were sacrificing their happiness for their jobs. He wanted them to feel like they were part of something bigger, a team that valued them as individuals, not just as workers. As the weeks passed, the restaurant's atmosphere began to change. The staff were less stressed, more open to communicating with one another, and more willing to speak up when they needed support. The flexible schedules allowed them to balance work with their personal lives, and the mental health initiatives gave them the tools to cope with the pressures of the job. Slowly but surely, the team started to feel like they were a family, and that made all the difference. The CEO made sure to check in regularly. He visited different locations, sitting down with employees and listening to their concerns. He didn't just want to make changes and leave. He wanted to be an active part of the transformation. He didn't want to be the CEO who made empty promises. He wanted to be the CEO who led by example. One afternoon, he visited the restaurant where he had gone undercover. He was curious to see how things had changed since his visit. He walked through the front door, not in disguise this time, but as himself. The staff recognized him immediately, and there was a sense of excitement in the air. It felt different. They weren't just going through the motions anymore, they seemed genuinely happy to see him. The waitress who had been crying in the kitchen was working that day. When she saw him, her eyes widened, but then a smile spread across her face. She walked over to him and they exchanged a brief, knowing look. "How are you doing?" the CEO asked, his voice warm. She smiled again, her eyes shining a little brighter. "I'm doing much better thanks to the time off you gave me. It made all the difference. I've been able to rest and catch up with my family. I feel like myself again." The CEO smiled, relieved. He could see the change in her, the way she held herself with more confidence, more joy. She was no longer carrying the weight of exhaustion on her shoulders. She looked like someone who had the space to breathe, to be a person outside of work. "That's good to hear," the CEO said. "You deserve that time to recharge." "I'm glad it helped," the waitress nodded. "It really did. And it's not just me. The whole team is feeling better. There's a different energy here now. We feel supported, and it's making all the difference." The CEO's heart swelled with pride. This was the change he had worked for. It wasn't just about implementing policies. It was about transforming the culture of his business. And it was working. "I'm proud of all of you," the CEO said. "Keep taking care of each other. Keep supporting one another. That's what makes this place special." As he left the restaurant that day, the CEO felt a sense of accomplishment that he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew that the work wasn't finished. There was always more to do. But the change was real, and it had started with one small decision: to listen, to see his employees as people, not just workers. And that decision had set a chain of events in motion that would make a lasting difference in the lives of his team. The weeks following the CEO's decision to change the company's culture were filled with small victories and challenges. The atmosphere in the restaurants was slowly but surely changing. Employees who had once seemed tired and worn out began to look more energized, more engaged. The team spirit was growing stronger, and there was a sense of camaraderie that had been missing before. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One of the most noticeable changes was in the way the employees interacted with each other. The once tense and frantic atmosphere had softened. People started to smile more, to laugh and joke during breaks. There was a sense of relief that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just the flexible schedules or the new mental health initiatives. It was the culture of respect and care that was beginning to take root. The CEO continued to visit different locations, checking in with the staff and getting feedback. He wanted to make sure the changes were sticking, that the employees truly felt supported. Each visit brought new insights. Some employees were still hesitant, unsure if the changes would last, while others were more optimistic, grateful for the chance to work in a more balanced environment. The CEO made it a point to listen, to hear their concerns and to act on them. One afternoon, during a visit to a different location, the CEO noticed a familiar face. It was the waitress who had been crying in the kitchen on his undercover visit. She had returned to work after her time off, and the change in her was striking. She was walking with more confidence, her smile was genuine, and she had a lightness in her step that wasn't there before. The CEO made his way over to her, a feeling of pride swelling in his chest as he watched her interact with the customers. She was no longer just going through the motions. She was fully engaged, laughing with the customers and offering them a warm and friendly experience. It was clear she was enjoying her work again. As she saw the CEO approach, her face lit up. "Hi," she said, walking over to him.
How are you?
"I'm doing great," the CEO replied with a smile. "How about you?" "I'm doing so much better," she said, her eyes bright. "The time off really helped. I feel like I can breathe again. I've been able to spend more time with my family, and I'm not constantly exhausted. It's been a game changer." The CEO nodded, pleased. "I'm really glad to hear that." "You deserve it." She smiled, a look of gratitude in her eyes. "Honestly, I didn't realize how much I needed it until I had that time off. It's like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I feel like I'm back to being myself again." The CEO couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. This was the change he had been working for, seeing employees like her find joy in their work again, seeing them feel valued not just as workers but as people. "Your energy is contagious," the CEO said. "It's great to see you so happy. It's exactly what we want here. People who are excited to come to work and feel like they're a part of something important." She laughed, a light, joyful sound. "I never thought I'd feel this way about a job, but now it feels like a team. We all have each other's backs, and that makes a huge difference." Her words resonated with the CEO. He had been hoping for this, a sense of belonging, a team that didn't just work together but supported one another through the ups and downs. It was clear that the culture shift was working, even if it had only been a few weeks since the changes were implemented. The effects were already visible. As he continued his visit, the CEO took the time to chat with other employees. He could see the difference in them too. The servers were more engaged with customers, the kitchen staff was working together more seamlessly, and even the managers seemed less stressed. They were all working with a renewed sense of purpose, and it was clear that they felt like their voices were being heard. The CEO walked through the kitchen, where the head chef was busy preparing orders. He stopped to talk to him, asking how things were going since the new changes had been implemented. The chef wiped his hands on his apron and looked up with a smile. "Honestly, it's been better," the chef said. "The kitchen feels more organized, and the staff is more motivated. The new schedules have helped a lot. People aren't as burnt out, and they're working more efficiently because they're actually getting the rest they need." "That's great to hear," the CEO said. "I'm glad the changes are making a difference." The chef nodded. "We're a team, you know, and when we're all in it together, it makes everything run smoother. I can see that with the way the front of house staff is handling things. It's a lot more fluid now. People are happier, and that energy carries over to the customers." The CEO smiled, knowing that this was exactly what he had hoped for, a company culture that focused on people, not just profit, a business that cared about its employees, their well-being, and their happiness. It was paying off in ways he hadn't expected. Not only were employees more content, but customers were noticing too. Later that day, the CEO had a chance to sit down with a group of managers. He wanted to hear how the changes had affected them, and whether they had noticed any improvements in their team's performance. One of the managers, a woman who had been with the company for several years, spoke up. "I've definitely seen a difference," she said. "The staff seems more connected and there's less tension. Before it felt like we were just getting through each shift, but now, people are genuinely enjoying their work. They're working together, helping each other out, and it's made everything so much smoother. The atmosphere is completely different." "That's exactly what we're aiming for," the CEO said, nodding. "I wanted to create a place where people felt like they were part of a community, not just employees punching in and out. It's not just about making money, it's about making sure people feel good about where they work." The manager smiled. "And I think that's starting to show. I've even noticed the customers responding differently. They're more relaxed, more patient, and they seem to appreciate the service more." "Absolutely," the CEO agreed. "Happy employees make for happy customers." As the conversation continued, the CEO could see the impact of his decisions unfolding. The staff was happier, more engaged, and more motivated. The restaurant was running more smoothly and the energy in the space had shifted. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges to address and adjustments to make, but it was a huge improvement. The CEO left the meeting that day with a sense of fulfillment. He had known that his approach would take time, but he was starting to see the results. He had created an environment where employees felt supported and cared for, and in turn they were giving their best to the customers. The changes didn't stop there. The CEO made it a priority to continue checking in with his team, making sure that the improvements weren't just temporary. He knew that a business could never rest on its laurels. There was always more to be done, more ways to grow and improve. But he felt confident that the foundation was now in place, a foundation built on empathy, support, and respect. And as he walked through the restaurant one last time before leaving, he couldn't help but notice the difference in the way the staff interacted with one another and with the customers. The atmosphere was lighter, the energy more positive. It was clear that the culture was shifting in a way that would last for years to come. The CEO smiled to himself as he walked out the door, knowing that he had made the right decision. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but he felt confident that he was on the right path, a path that valued people first and foremost. And that, he realized, was the true key to success.